Welcome everyone to ITIF's webinar, Further Energizing Innovation, Federal Energy RD&D in fiscal year 2023 and beyond. My name is David Hart. I am the Director of the Center for Clean Energy Innovation at ITIF. Of the latest ITIF report on the Department of Energy's Research, Development, and Demonstration budget. The title references Energizing America, a book that we published along with colleagues from Columbia University in 2020, which set forth a 5-year pathway to triple investment in energy RD&D. Our report is accompanied by a data visualization site that will be updating as the budget moves through Congress in the coming months, with luck. My colleague Hoyu Chong, who was the lead author of the report, will tell you more about it a little later. And we hope that folks who are listening to this webinar will bookmark it and that it will continue to serve as a valuable community resource. The cycle of our annual budget report kicks off with the administration's budget request, and I'm very pleased to welcome Kathleen Hogan, a senior member of the administration, to the webinar. After Dr. Hogan speaks and perhaps answers a couple of questions, and you're welcome to offer questions through the Slido box on your screen, Hoyu will present the report and I will introduce our other panelists. So let me welcome Dr. Kathleen Hogan to the webinar. She is the Principal Deputy Undersecretary for Infrastructure, having moved to this newly created position from the position of Acting Undersecretary for Science and Energy. So between those two jobs, she has pretty much overseen everything that we'll be talking about today. And we're really happy to have her join us. Dr. Hogan, thanks for coming.
Well, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. It's great to join you all at this critical inflection point in the history of America's energy security and infrastructure. I don't think it's any surprise to the people in this audience that the historic investment of $62 billion into the Department of Energy through the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law is going to be a much needed catalyst in the demonstration deployment of energy infrastructure necessary to do so many things. You know, lower household energy bills, insulate Americans from global fossil energy swings, and dramatically reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. And it truly is an honor to be in the role of Principal Deputy Undersecretary for Infrastructure right now at the Department of Energy, helping implement both this historic law and really helping reimagine how the department supports clean energy research, development, demonstration, and deployment. You know, it's a very exciting time and one where we're really looking to our partners across the country, of course, for their support, ideas, and expertise to accomplish what's a really massive mission. So I am excited to share a few things we're working on within our new Office of Infrastructure, share some of our priorities for the department's next year's budget, and then hopefully get to a few questions. So 180-day highlights. Can you believe it that it's 180 days since the signing of the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law? So I would like to spend a few minutes talking about how the department is positioning itself for mission success. But before that, really stress that we have just passed the 6-month anniversary for the law, and point to a few things that the department has advanced during this time. And it's a great opportunity to show how our current work will really inform the rest of what we're doing for the implementation of the law. You know, as we sit here today, our teams have already announced over $10 billion in available funding. This spans things like the Civil Nuclear Credits Program, helping keep gigawatts of clean power on the grid, as well as funding for our Advanced Reactor Demo Program, helping build the next generation of reactors that will come online. And we've announced billions of dollars to invest in domestic battery manufacturing supply chain, and have almost an additional doubling of the funding available through our weatherization program. So to do all this, we have created 4 new offices at DOE. We do have our new Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, an office for grid deployment, an office on manufacturing and energy supply chains, and a new office for state and community energy programs. These offices are placed right alongside with a number of offices that many know well: Indian Energy, Loan Programs, Federal Energy Management, and Cyber and Energy Security offices. And all of these will, of course, be working very closely with our science and technology offices within the Undersecretary for Science and Innovation, and really working together to bring the best of DOE's R&D capabilities together with the lessons from demonstration deployment in this new Undersecretary for Infrastructure. So over the next few months, you will see more announcements coming from our team in the form of RFIs, NOIs, and additional funding announcements, and certainly encourage you to look at all that and send in thoughts and comments. So that's sort of what we're up and doing with this big additional amount of funding that Congress has provided. But let's also turn over to some things that I know you all are here to discuss, which is the FY23 budget request and DOE. You know, as we look at this, we see the DOE 23 budget, which includes annual funding for efforts, for a whole variety of efforts, as truly complementary to the bipartisan infrastructure law, and one that can help us maximize its impacts for all these objectives that we have, all these mission objectives that are so important: lowering costs, providing secure, reliable American power, and continuing to build out our domestic manufacturing and clean energy supply chains, which can really drive jobs and economic improvement. So the request also supports, of course, our Office of Energy Efficiency and Renewable Energy, Office of Science, our national labs, which continue to drive innovative capacity and advance sort of the competitive edge of what we do. And our budget includes funding for DOE missions that keep our country safe, of course, from environmental management to nuclear safety. When I look at the offices in the Undersecretary for Infrastructure, you know, our budget request totals about $2.1 billion to, again, complement but not duplicate the bipartisan infrastructure law, the $62 billion. You know, while $62 billion is a tremendous down payment that will help supercharge our work, there do remain important gaps to address that we really do need to address to speed progress, again, across some of our top objectives for reducing costs, securing domestic manufacturing, and generating good paying jobs. So some of our priorities in the request include, and in some broad buckets, includes continuing the work we need to do to improve the nation's energy delivery infrastructure, such as supporting crucial long-term and regional planning, technical assistance to help build the next generation transmission distribution systems, and also includes supporting partnerships with industry and others to secure the energy infrastructure against all hazards and really up our game against cyber and other disruptive events. And that also includes supporting additional grid-related demonstrations to address important gaps in our clean energy demonstration portfolio, really on integration of advanced energy technologies with our grid. So that's one big bucket, our energy delivery infrastructure. Another important priority, and you've heard me mention this already, is what we need to do to keep strengthening our manufacturing and energy supply chains. Really needed to modernize our energy infrastructure, but more broadly support the clean energy transition. We really are looking to build out DOE's ability to share information about energy supply chains, the clean energy technologies, and address workforce issues and other opportunities. We also are looking to align the Loan Programs Office with newly expanded authorities in the bipartisan infrastructure law to support projects that can help bolster the domestic critical mineral supply chain. And we're looking to increase clean energy assistance and also the flexibility of that assistance to many of our frontline community partners throughout the country. So this includes things like helping weatherization reach and benefit more low-income households. It's support for some new funding mechanisms Congress gave us this year for the first time, such as Energy Future grants to help state and local entities scale best practices, and then also continuing to support increase funding to our tribes and Native Alaskan villages so we can really make a big dent in improving energy access and continuing to assist them in the transition to clean energy. So the funding in the Office of Infrastructure, of course, goes hand in hand with a $14.7 billion request for the Undersecretary for Science and Innovation as they continue to drive on fundamental science, innovation, core research development, and demonstration missions across the applied programs and the labs. About $7.8 billion of that is for the Office of Science to grow investments in administration priorities, including basic research on climate change and clean energy, artificial intelligence and machine learning, and biopreparedness. So as you know, quite a broad portfolio. So overall, I think what you're probably seeing is a theme that our missions do continue to require strong science, technology, and engineering capabilities, and a modern, revitalized infrastructure. We will continue with our budget request the fight against climate change by supporting things like the Energy Earthshots initiative to continue to accelerate breakthroughs in really important areas so we can, again, continue to work on abundant, affordable, and reliable clean energy solutions. So just to conclude here, we've got a lot on tap for our 23 budget, and certainly a lot that we will continue to do as we work to implement the $62 billion that came through in the bill. So a lot of engagement we want to have with you all on thoughts and ideas. And also I'll express an interest in having you encourage talented people to join the DOE Clean Energy Corps so we can get great people here in the DOE continuing to do that work. So again, thanks for the opportunity to be here, and I look forward to hearing your questions. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hogan, for that overview, and thank you so much for taking on this, what seems like a Herculean task in setting up this new office and overseeing so much activity. So let me invite viewers to put questions into the Slido box if you'd like, but let me take the initiative and offer a couple of my own. So sometimes the innovation process is perceived as going through a series of stages from research to development to demonstration into adoption in the market. And it seems like the reorganization of DOE suggests a somewhat different relationship with the later stages of that process and market. I wonder if you could characterize, how the administration thinks about that. Is it a real transformation of the DOE's mission expressed in this reorganization? How do you think about its relationship to innovation and especially the market side of that?
So we do see the new Office of Infrastructure being able to, as we talk about it, build out new muscle at the Department of Energy that takes the technology that we've been working on for a long time and really helps the agency engage in a different way. One is to be much stronger partners with states and communities around what's happening on the ground. And that is where you get the intersections of economic development, manufacturing, energy supply chains, and the ability to help communities, including those that are frequently left behind, really participate in this clean energy transition and benefit from it. So we can come out of this transition in a stronger way, in many different ways, right? We all want to address the issue of climate change, but we want it with really vital, healthy communities and everyone being part. And that's one of the important muscles here. And again, so the community engagement, the energy supply chain capabilities, and then I would say the other thing that we're bringing to the table in this new office is the skill set that it takes to manage what are much larger scale demonstration projects that we need to have to be successful with these technologies on the ground. I think a great example are the hydrogen hubs. Congress gave us many billions of dollars to put into hubs to demonstrate them. But so what is that, right? So these aren't the sort of type of demonstrations that the department has done many times around reducing technology risk. what we view is these have to be demonstrations that demonstrate both the technology, but the business models you can bring to the table to really drive liftoff of a whole new sort of clean energy economy ecosystem, right? So that's what we are working to bring to the table. So thanks for that question, because it really is quite a different set of capabilities and ways of looking at the same technologies, but how is it you really help this country benefit from these great technologies that are coming?
Thanks. Yeah, I'm really heartened to hear that last message, especially. ITIF has taken a strong interest in demonstration, and it's exciting to see the department diversify the expertise and think a bit differently about these really big projects, which are different from R&D. We have a question from the audience. I don't know if you want to take this one on. You certainly should feel free to pass on it, but whether you want to offer any remarks on the solar PV trade dispute that's going on right now.
I mean, as I'll just say, we all know that's a complex issue with lots of agencies involved too, between Commerce, the Department of Energy. These things are so hard to navigate, but we will certainly be working to do the best we can, for what we can do for manufacturing here and for installation here. But yeah, very complex.
Thanks. Yeah. So last question. I realize it's a long ways off, but I'm a bit worried already about the possibility of a sort of a fiscal cliff when the infrastructure funding runs out. And again, I know you have your hands full right now, and 5 years is a long time in Washington time, especially. But I'm curious if you have any thoughts on, what might happen at the end of that period.
Yeah, so what's interesting about a lot of the infrastructure funding, when you really start mapping out what it takes to get the solicitations out the door, get them well designed, and get the feedback that you need, to get the community engagement that you need to really design for success here, and then start to manage the money. What we're viewing is many of these bill provisions are probably more like an 8 to 10 year play. Again, you get things stood up, you start constructing these big projects. So we've got that period of time, I think, and the funding and the ability to manage these big projects for that period of time. So I think we're going to be able to have lots of conversations with various players about what it is we're able to accomplish with these bill dollars, what the gaps are, and then presumably, continue to fill in those gaps over time. The department has also been, well funded by Congress across its applied efforts for many years now. So if we can keep leveraging, Congress's interest in the mission around these critical gaps, I think there'll be sort of less of a cliff than one might otherwise think.
Thanks very much. I will try to chill out on that. That's very reassuring. And with that, let me just thank you again for joining us. Thank you again for your hard work on behalf of the missions of DOE. And we wish you well. We want, especially the Office of Clean Energy demonstration, to be a great success. So
thank you
thanks
so
for
much.
joining us today.
Thank you.
With that, let me welcome in the other participants in today's program, and I'll introduce them, and then we'll turn to them in sequence. So the first up will be Hoyu Chong, my colleague here at ITIF. She's a senior policy analyst at the Center for Clean Energy Innovation. She joined us about 6 months ago from Beacon Economics in the Los Angeles area, and has been diving deep into the DOE budget and federal energy innovation policy since joining us, and she'll share our new report. Then we have a panel, two of our leading members of our DC energy innovation community. I don't think it's too much of a stretch to say that these folks are the hubs of that community. So actually, we didn't talk about who's going first, so I'll say Robin's going to go first. Robin Milliken is the Director of Policy and Advocacy at Breakthrough Energy, where she and her team are responsible for grant making, coalition building, and legislative strategy, and she is the go-to person for everybody in town on energy innovation policy. And then second panelist is Dan Byers, VP for Climate and Technology, at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Global Energy Institute. Before joining the chamber, he was on the staff of the House Science Committee and did at least 2 stints at the White House. So he has been in and around energy, technology, and innovation policy for a couple of decades and across a number of institutions. So has a great perspective to share. And with that, Hoyu is going to make a presentation for about 10 or 12 minutes, and then we will turn to our two panelists and again invite your questions through Slido. Thanks.
Thanks, David. So hi, thank you, David, and thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Hoyu Chang, a senior policy analyst here at ITIF. And before I go on, I want to thank Kathleen Schreiber for her wonderful work on the data visualization that accompanies this report. Today, we'll be discussing our recently published report that looks at the federal energy RD&D in FY2023 and beyond. And as David mentioned, we're joined by a wonderful panel that will talk about how to further energize energy innovation in America. So the main report provides a historical and comparative context of the Department of Energy's energy RD&D budget. And throughout the report, there are also some sidebars that highlight recent major wins and discuss ways that the U.S. government can further accelerate innovation in energy RD&D. And we also have a visualization that the team has been updating constantly throughout the cycle. The data visualization contains a time series that tracks the DOE spending on energy innovation, how it has changed over time, and it also has recommendations tailored to each program for DOE and Congress. The data visualization is easy to use and is a really great community resource for those who want to track RD&D spending over time and in a more specific detail. I really encourage everyone to please check it out after this webinar. So this is actually ITIF's fifth time tracking energy RD&D annually. This report builds on Energizing America, as David mentioned, which is a book-length collaboration between Columbia University and ITIF, as well as some more recent ITIF reports and discussions on energy RD&D budget and recent analyses. This report also built on two very key pieces of legislation passed in recent years: the Energy Act of 2020, which modernizes and refocuses the DOE's RD&D programs on scaling up clean energy technologies, as well as the IIJA, which funds key technologies like clean hydrogen, carbon capture, and electric vehicle batteries to tackling emissions in hard-to-abate sectors, as well as establishing the Office of Clean Energy Demonstration, filling a glaring gap in DOE's portfolio so far. But both of these legislation are not part of the regular budget, and the IIJA was sunset after FY 2026, which is why, while that these are great developments, we have to keep the momentum together. And looking immediately forward, there are some legislative opportunities that can help further energize innovation. For example, the Innovation and Competitiveness legislation, which is being resolved in both chambers of commerce currently. It would add almost $17 billion with a gradual ramp up to carry out R&D and address energy-related supply chain activities within the key technology focus areas. So let's jump to the main report findings. The Department of Energy actually has a lot of functions, not just energy itself. So this chart illustrates what the DOE's main functions are, and the main focus here is the 8.6 billion in FY 2022, which is the energy RD&D portion. So in that sense, only a small portion, or about 1/5 of DOE's budget, remains to support clean energy innovation. And that is mostly assigned to various applied energy offices and some to the Office of Science. The DOE's energy program includes both RD&D and non-RD&D functions, such as the Federal Energy Management Program, which was formerly under ERE and now moved under to the Office of the Undersecretary of Infrastructure. Diving more deeply into the 8.6 billion RD&D budget, this chart illustrates a more detailed breakdown of the programs and sub-programs levels. So the DOE's energy RD&D programs span across ARPA-E, the new Office of Clean Energy Demonstration, as well as 7 technology categories: renewable energy, sustainable transportation, energy efficiency, energy transmission, storage and distribution, nuclear energy, fossil energy and carbon management, and finally, basic energy-related research. Some of you may already be familiar with most of these programs, and in addition to the OECD, Renewable Energy and Grid Integration under ERE is also a relatively new office that aims to address system-level challenges to the reliable integration of renewable energy into the power system. So far, how has the DOE's spending compared to historic levels? So this chart shows the spending in 2021 dollars indicated by the dark blue bars and spending as a percentage of US GDP indicated by the orange line, and finally as well as the gap between where we are and where we could have been, which are indicated by the dashed bars. So as mentioned, there are some really exciting news. The Bipartisan Infrastructure and Jobs Act, which added 9.1 billion on top of the regular FY2022 budget. It brings the total to $17 billion in 2022, or slightly more than double the previous year's RD&D budget. The additional funding appropriated by IIJA is indicated by the light blue bar here in the chart. But yet, still, the orange line, which tracks energy RD&D as a share of GDP, shows that the U.S. still has a ways to go. Although energy RD&D spending has been climbing up so far gradually in the 21st century, and its share of GDP has also been slowly going up, this is really nothing to cheer about so far, because it's just climbing back up from the low point in 2000, as you can see here. During the period from 1978 to 2000, energy RD&D as a share of GDP fell sharply from 0.14% in 1978 to just 0.03% in 2000. Therefore, if we use 1978 as a benchmark, you can see that right now that we're still ways to go. In fact, in FY 2022, this will have amounted to $30 billion or so. So, despite that, this is still a great start after years of low investments. And now that the president's budget is put forward, now it is up to Congress to keep up the momentum established in recent years' budgets. So note that this information is also available on our data visualization website, which I want to stress again that it's a community resource for everyone who want to dive into the data and dig into energy RD&D investment in general. I mentioned that there have been quite a number of wins in recent years. This chart shows the regular FY 2022 enacted or the FY 2023 budget requested, plus the amount appropriated by the IIJA and how that total compares to a level recommended by Energizing America. There are a few things to unpack here. First, thanks to the IIJA, fundings for some of these offices have blown way past Energizing America's recommended levels, particularly in vehicles technology office, hydrogen and fuel cells technologies office, and carbon management. One key central theme is that a big chunk of these appropriations will fund important technologies such as batteries manufacturing and recycling, the hydrogen hubs that Dr. Hogan had mentioned, and carbon removal, which will undoubtedly become increasingly important. And the second thing I want to emphasize here is that FY 2023 budget had also proposed some big boosts, particularly to solar and wind. In the US, solar and wind accounted for almost 60% of electricity generation capacity added in the previous decade, but only 13% of net generation in 2021. The expanded funding proposed would aim to drive improvements that would enable deeper solar and wind penetration in electricity grid. Another key theme is increasing manufacturing competitiveness, particularly in solar. As many of you may already know, currently China is the largest supplier of solar parts. And as part of a supply chain competitiveness strategy that President Biden has put forth last year, this request would provide funding for the new Solar Manufacturing Accelerator, an initiative that partners the Solar Energy Technology Office with the Advanced Manufacturing Office. Finally, not all offices are winning actually. Particularly, the report finds that the Geothermal Technology Office, the Bioenergy Technology Office and the Buildings Technology Office are lagging behind others. A more detailed discussion of these offices are in the report. So with that, I want to conclude that let's keep the momentum going. The US should now stop playing catch up and reestablish itself as a leader in clean energy innovation. As mentioned previously, Energizing America recommended $25 billion by 2025. Indeed, other organizations such as the Environmental Defense Fund and the Breakthrough Energy have also recommended at least $30 billion by this decade. Therefore, at $19 billion and increasing, let's close the gap. And last but not least, the US should also leverage this opportunity to effectively lead the new missions established in international coalitions, such as the Mission Innovation 2.0 and the First Movers Coalition. Climate change is worsening the frequency, intensity, and impact of extreme weather events, from the record heat wave in India that is ongoing to the worsening wildfire season in California, where I previously called home. According to the international energy agencies tracking clean energy progress, just 2 out of 46 key technologies in climate and clean energy tech are on track. And amid the current energy crisis, RD&D investments and innovation are more important than ever. Finally, as mentioned, please don't forget to check out our interactive data visualization. It lets you track historical funding and subprogram details. This slide shows you snippets of what the data visualization looks like, with much more to come. And if you have questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me or David. Thank you.
Discussion phase. Pleased to welcome Robin Milliken of Breakthrough Energy. Robin.
Thank you, David, and appreciate the kind introduction earlier. I also wanted to extend a special thank you to Dr. Hogan, who is no longer on the line, but I just thought her opening keynote was really fantastic, and in particular, her reference to this moment of reimagining what the department can be and do. I think there's no better way to put it. So I'm very pleased to be here today because climate and energy innovation are topics that are really deeply embedded in the mission of Breakthrough Energy. And it's, of course, a topic that our founder, Bill Gates, cares deeply about. The idea to create Breakthrough Energy actually coincided with the launch of Mission Innovation in 2015, which, as many here know, brought together governments around the world to double their energy R&D budgets. Mr. Gates was a key part of that effort, but at the time recognized that those public dollars, while essential in order to be effective as possible, would need to be complemented by significant private sector and philanthropic mobilization as well. So that was why we started the Breakthrough Energy Venture Fund shortly after the launch of Mission Innovation. And since then, we've grown the Breakthrough Energy organization to encompass a variety of programs that are all tackling gaps across the innovation cycle. What has remained constant over the years, however, is our laser-like focus on ensuring that the critical innovation and deployment activities of the Department of Energy are well resourced at the levels referenced earlier in this presentation. In that effort, I want to recognize the vital work that ITIF has done, because they've originated some of the most high impact analysis out there on where we need to be investing in order to get to net zero, including their latest report and the fantastic new budget tool, visualization tool, that Hoyi walked through earlier. I think those are all really important contributions. What we see in this analysis is we've made some really important strides toward our goal in recent years. I want to call out a few highlights in my mind, just thinking about the years we've been doing this work that really speak to how much has happened. Number one, for the last several years now, each year Congress has recognized the need to continue growing climate and energy RD&D funding in the annual appropriations process, reflecting bipartisan consensus on the importance of this topic. Number two, we had the Bipartisan Energy Act of 2020, which was the most significant energy bill to have passed in nearly 15 years, which updated our federal innovation strategy and authorized new funding levels for key programs. Number 3, less than a year later, after the Energy Act passed, Congress, of course, reached a bipartisan agreement to provide over $40 billion in multi-year funding for many of the demonstration programs that were authorized in the Energy Act, including hydrogen hubs, direct air capture hubs and prizes, and many other things that Dr. Hogan mentioned earlier. Number 4, the infrastructure bill also established the new Office of Clean Energy Demonstrations, using recommendations from ITIF and others to manage the large-scale demonstration funding provided by the bill in one place, which is key. And then number 5, this year, under Secretary Granholm's leadership, the department has also made significant structural changes and created an undersecretary for infrastructure to advance the clean energy projects laid out in the infrastructure law. These are all amazing accomplishments that we need to definitely applaud and recognize for their significance. I will say, though, and this is validated by the ITIF analysis, it does still mean we can't rest on our laurels, right? We've made a lot of progress, but there's still ground to cover. While it's essential that we, of course, get to the point of demonstrating this suite of next generation technologies, we need to keep in mind that these are time-bound investments in specific projects. And certainly we want to avoid the fiscal cliff that David Nhoyu's presentation referenced earlier. And of course, investing in these projects doesn't obviate the need to increase ongoing research and development funding, improve technology commercialization, and provide later stage financing for nth-of-a-kind projects once they get past the demonstration phase. So looking ahead, the FY23 bill under consideration right now is an opportunity to do these things. Congress, of course, recently kicked off their process with budget hearings recently, and we're really encouraged to see that the president's budget calls for about a 15% increase for DOE innovation programs over the last year. The budget request prioritizes a few key areas that we also think are very important, such as providing credit subsidy costs to improve access to the Title 17 loan guarantee program. It funds renewable energy demonstration projects through the OSED and continues funding for the Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program. In addition to these requests, we think there are several other priorities that should be key in the FY23 process. First, we think it's really important, especially in the geopolitical moment that we're in, to prioritize funding a domestic source of high assay, low enriched uranium to shore up supply chains for the next generation of advanced nuclear reactors that will be commercially available in the coming years. At least $300 million will be needed this year to get that effort started. Second, we urge Congress to prioritize investments in sustainable aviation fuel. We won't be able to electrify long-haul aviation, and as such, we need to prioritize critical efforts to develop alternative fuels that are led by programs such as the Bioenergy Technology Office and programs at the FAA. Notably, this is an area that the infrastructure bill did not include funding for, so we think it should be a top priority for Congress and the department in coming years. Last, we see a need to continue increasing research and development funding for the Hydrogen Fuel Cell Technologies Office to advance hydrogen technology, specifically in the hard-to-abate sectors, such as transportation and industry, which we think is needed in order to both complement the hydrogen hubs funding that was made available in the infrastructure bill and is also needed to support the DOE's hydrogen Earthshot goal, which seeks to reduce the cost of clean hydrogen by 80%. These are just a few pressing areas of need, but there are many others. For example, Dr. Hogan mentioned transmission, technology development, and technical assistance, which will be key for adoption, carbon removal technologies, and also small business and entrepreneurship programs. Those are all very important areas we need to continue investing. I also want to mention that while appropriations is, of course, the best opportunity to make progress, there's also competitiveness legislation in Congress that would address some of these areas. And it shouldn't go without mention that as all of these technologies get closer to market, the tax credit package in whatever vehicle or form will be absolutely key to making sure that these projects are successful. So to wrap up, I just want to reiterate that there is a continued imperative to innovate, arguably more so than ever in this moment of geopolitical instability. We need to do it to address climate. We need to bring emerging technologies to the marketplace for competitiveness reasons. We need to strengthen supply chains. And of course, we need to lower energy costs and make the US less reliant on foreign energy sources wherever we can. Otherwise, we risk ceding leadership on the global stage. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to the Q&A. Back to you, David.
Thank you, Robin. Our second panelist is Dan Byers from U.S. Chamber of Commerce's Global Energy Institute. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, David. Great to be here and appreciate it. I'll be brief. Really just want to try to share why the Chamber cares so much about DOE appropriations and some of the evolution and perspectives of our members as we work on these issues. First, I want to congratulate ITIF and Hoya on the report. I read it on Saturday when I was getting my oil changed, and you know how that is. It ended up taking 2 hours, so I got a good bit of time with the report, but it's really, really well done, systematic, thorough, lots of historical context, and the data visualizations are useful too. So really would commend everyone to that report. Just a few observations, and then we can get into Q&A that I think are maybe important to kind of keep in mind when we talk about some of the individual programs that Robin, Hoya, and Dr. Hogan covered. And first of all, clean energy is a national security imperative. I think that's clear as we sort of watch the aftermath of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. There's some debate and maybe some lamenting that the war and inflation and everything else will distract from the climate issue. And I think that's actually true. It will, just as a political reality. But at the same time, the clean energy transition, if you look at everything that we need to do to address climate change, it also is really important for national security. So it may not be the reason that we push for more appropriations and a focus on this, but it's going to effectively not necessarily change things. I mean, when I look at the report that Hoya put together and look at all those different programs and areas of funding, to me, I see opportunities across buildings, nuclear, efficiency, transportation, storage, et cetera. Every single one of those, hopefully over the next few years and decade, will reduce Russia's grip on the rest of the world, its influence on the rest of the world. So I think we have to kind of take that mindset as we think about sort of the climate and energy debate, because it has been fundamentally reset by the war. Second point, and to no surprise, the business ambition that we're seeing from our members. 5 years ago, there wasn't that many members that were setting very specific, detailed commitments in terms of their own operations and ambition, be it a 2050 net zero, 2030 midterm targets, et cetera. Essentially, over the last couple of years, most all of our members, it doesn't matter if it's a utility, an auto company, financial sector, cement, on and on and on. They're basically looking, they're very eager to have stretch commitments. 2050 net zero, very, very common, and certainly midterm 2030 goals where they look at what they might be able to achieve in the long term. And the common theme there that we see is, yeah, we can get a decent chunk of the way, and yes, we're going to need a tax incentive deployment, all these sort of facilitating policies, but ultimately we're going to need breakthroughs to get to that sort of second half of the hardest to abate emissions reductions. And so that's one thing sort of stuck in our mind as we work with our members and think about what's really important in climate policy. And then the third point is really just the global context and what we call the technology imperative. And I think folks are all very familiar with that. And essentially, the world right now is about 35 gigatons annually of CO2 emissions. The 1.5 degree report says you need to cut that in half over the next 10 years. The baseline reference is that we're probably adding 7 or 8 gigatons of emissions as the rest of the world continues to develop and demand for energy grows. And while in the US we may be able to absorb higher costs for alternative energy and make very significant effective reductions. The rest of the world is only going to adopt low carbon alternatives if they are cheaper. And so everything to us points back to essentially what we're working on through Energy Act, Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, and Department of Energy. In my mind, I think, I always try to think about what is the arc of emissions 10 to 15 years from now. And I personally think that these programs right now that are being launched and implemented are going to be the single most important factor to how quickly the emissions curve can be bent. So I think with all that kind of as context, maybe I'll stop and just go ahead and wait for a Q&A.
Thank you, Dan. If and when you have an electric vehicle, you won't have to have your oil changed. So
Yeah.
I don't know if our reports will get read in the future. It makes me a little bit leery of that. So let's welcome back all the panelists and also invite questions into the Slido box. So Dan, I think I would maybe reinterpret a little bit what you said. Potentially, the recent developments make the political coalition behind the programs we're talking about stronger. While they may not necessarily agree on why they support it. First of all, I guess, is that an accurate characterization? And let me see if others want to offer thoughts on that. Of course, in our report, we don't handicap the political situation, but here on stage, we can. So, but Dan, is that a fair characterization of what you said?
Well, I think it's early, but that's my kind of expectation once the dust settles. And one thing for us is business hates uncertainty. And so when we think about climate policy, we want durability, and that requires bipartisan sort of consensus building. And so if the right and left have different reasons for supporting clean energy, so be it. The important thing is that we have that support. And again, it's not exploiting the reality or a crisis to do this. It actually is very true. When you look at DOE's programs, they are going to be hugely important to the future geopolitics.
Yeah, thanks. Robin or Hoya, do you want to offer some thoughts on that concept?
I think it's a really great point that these moments of crisis are, kind of clarifying as far as priorities. This is maybe neither here nor there, but, the reason that we got the Department of Energy was the, energy crisis in the 70s and the need for, conservation originally. The reason why we got the Department of Homeland Security was 9/11. I mean, this, moment maybe isn't quite on the level of, those crises yet, but I think it's certainly, a fair, point to make that this is going to be a kind of focusing moment for the political coalition around energy. So hopefully that breaks in favor of continuing to stay the course on diversification long term, but we'll see.
Thanks. How are you?
Sure. Right. The elevated level of RD&D investment in energy in the late 1970s is in response to the ongoing energy crisis that have been occurring throughout the 1970s. But this time with climate change in the forefront, we have another layer of obstacle to tackle. Energy needs to not only be affordable, not just clean, but also secure. And in my native language, we have this saying that when there's danger, there are opportunities. I feel that as Dan said, there are opportunities everywhere, and now is the time to pivot away from dependence and reliance on fossil fuel energy and toward clean energy.
Thanks very much. Yeah, it's going to be fascinating to see how this breaks, because Europe clearly is in a much more of a crisis because of the recent events, and it also had a kind of existing trajectory, more strongly towards addressing climate change. And I don't know whether the rest of the world feels as much. So I think that's going to be, a matter for the next few months or years to prove out. I have a question. Would ask for your response from the audience. So let me frame it this way. So these RD&D programs take a long time to pay off in terms of emissions reduction. And do you have a concern that the emissions reductions will take too long to materialize from these, and are the things that we should be doing, to cut those now while these future solutions are underway. Robin, I see you nodding, so I'm going to call on you.
So the answer is yes and yes. I think there are things that we need to absolutely be doing right now, to reduce emissions. Building up the grid such that we can integrate more renewable energy is just a very obvious area where we need to be making serious efforts. And the infrastructure bill does have a lot of, great and helpful both policy and funding aspects to it in that regard. As far as the demonstration projects themselves, I mean, these projects in aggregate won't themselves amount to much in terms of emissions because they're, demonstration scale projects. There are only a handful of them, but that's not the right way to think about it. The right way to think about it is it's the first step toward scaling this important technology that once fully deployed will make a huge difference in emissions and is essential in order to reach net zero by 2050. So for example, we don't have a whole lot of efforts going on around industrial decarbonization. So for example, cement is 8% of global emissions. These dollars can go toward funding projects to capture CO2 from the cement process that could really transform that industry. So it's a necessary first step toward realizing the emission reductions we need over the coming decades.
I might just add, I think the commenter makes a really fair point, and these programs that are in IIJA and through the annual appropriations, they can be incredibly successful, but that's not necessarily going to make the difference. And so we do have to think about all the complementary policies that are going to make sure the deployment occurs as fast as it possibly can. And so I think about, the hydrogen production tax credit. So folks are always sort of looking at how they might pair this with the deployment technologies that are going to be needed to go alongside that.
Sure.
Thanks. Go ahead, Hoyu.
Yeah, I just want to add on by saying that this is actually a very good question, and it's one that I think about it from time to time. And from my personal experience, I see that I agree with Robin that it's a yes and yes. So for example, one area that I think there are opportunities to really act now and get the immediate benefits would be retrofitting existing buildings. So in my home state, California, more and more jurisdictions are passing ordinances and mandates that a new construction are to be electrified and has banned fossil fuel appliances. However, the current existing building stock turnover has been low, and a lot of them have not been updated or retrofitted in several decades. But on the other hand, I also believe that that investment in innovation is extremely important, because the longer we put off to it, the longer we kick the can down the road, it's only going to become much harder to decarbonize these sectors. And on that note, I think we have seen in the past with successes from such as smartphone adoption, it went from nothing to just about everyone now has a smartphone in a pretty short period of time. So I believe it can be repeated in our energy tech.
Thank you very much. So we've got a few minutes left. I wanted to just pick up a couple of themes that Robin mentioned and ask a little bit beyond the appropriations discussion about the DOE's organization and reorganization. So it obviously already undertook this major reorganization in the last few months, but there are a couple of offices that seem to me to be somewhat misplaced. Notably, you mentioned the hydrogen office, which is closely linked to the vehicles office, but yet hydrogen has a lot of other applications. And advanced manufacturing also, which is in energy efficiency and has primarily been viewed historically as a way to advance energy efficiency, and yet obviously, manufacturing again has implications and contributions to make across the spectrum. So I'm curious what your outlook is on further reorganization. When we wrote Energizing America, we really debated this, and we decided let's just go for the money and leave the organization. Obviously, that was not a viable solution, as this recent reorg shows that in order to execute the money, you have to have some changes in organization. So curious how you're thinking about that, Robin, and then I'll turn to the others.
Yeah, what's the saying? Form follows function, or functions follows form in this situation. But I think, David, this is a great question. Actually, one I wish Dr. Hogan were still here for, because she sees this up close, much more closely than any of the rest of us. I think that there are a few areas that would be kind of no regrets, low hanging fruit to do some further changes. You mentioned a few of the big ones, hydrogen by nature of it being used for grid balancing, as a feedstock in industrial processes, as a, fuel in the transportation sector. That should probably, folks should contemplate moving that to a different location where it could better be leveraged by all of the different component parts of the DOE. AMO, now that there's a new manufacturing and supply chain office in the infrastructure office, might need to be reformulated to be more of an industrial, decarbonization oriented entity and elevated to a different position. I think that would make a lot of sense. And then there are other areas like fuels, right? If we're going to get really serious about low carbon liquid fuels, we've got the bioenergy office, there's the hydrogen office, but that's another area where, some kind of cross-cutting collaboration will need to occur. So I leave it to the very smart and capable folks at the Department of Energy to determine what existing or remaining bandwidth they have to do some of these additional changes. But I do think they would make a big difference in terms of having folks that are really empowered to innovate in some of these really important challenge areas.
Thanks. Anybody else want to offer a comment on a DOE organization?
The only thing I'll say is I remember being back on the Hill, 10, 15 years ago and having these same conversations, because you always have this sort of stovepiping, but at the same time, you're organizing by sort of the physics or the chemistry or the sectoral application, and you're never going to get it perfect. So probably, the most important thing is to make sure that you're able to at least identify where you have the stovepiping and then have communication coordination across. So it's a question that's never going to get fully solved.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to wrap up with just one. I'm going to rephrase a question from the audience. And that has to do with whether some of these investments may have diminishing returns. Vannevar Bush famously initiated the post-World War II science policy of the United States with a report called Science, the Endless Frontier. And of course, that suggests that there are no diminishing returns. And in fact, there might be even increasing returns. So we've had a big boost. We've had steady growth, and now a big boost, and we're pushing for more. So curious how you would respond briefly to the idea that perhaps we might be throwing bad money after good, if I can put it that way. Dan, go ahead.
I would just say, look, at this point in time, no way. Again, because we just talked about all the fundamental reasons with the demand now with climate and geopolitics, and frankly, even economic growth and opportunity. I would say that the case is stronger. So now they're not going to hit on every single thing that you're working in, but the ones that you do hit on, the return is going to be, effectively potentially orders of magnitude. So on balance, it's going to be very, very worthwhile investments.
Thanks.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I think, looking at the fact that energy is a $5 trillion a year industry alone, like the potential addressable market for new innovative products is huge, and we're spending less. I think Dorothy Robine used this analogy. We're spending less on R&D right now as a country than we spend on potato chips. So I think there's still a lot of room to grow. Also, if you look at the overall, sort of social benefit calculus, like the avoided cost of all of the carbon that we will emit if we can innovate, new ways of producing energy or removing CO2, managing it better, those are, astronomical as well. So I'm sure there is it's finite, there is a limit, but I think we're far from reaching it.
Thanks. And Hoya, you get 30 seconds quickie if you would like one on this.
Okay. So I just want to say that if anything, when looking at the public RD&D data and venture capital investment data, I would say that so far the investments have actually been too risk averse in safe betting technologies, and we can have breakthroughs if we're playing it safe. It requires bold actions. So while the concern is valid, I also think that we need to be more bold and be more daring in finding these breakthrough discoveries that can help ultimately help avoid carbon emissions.
That is the perfect way to close. Let me thank the audience, thank Dr. Hogan again for joining us, and thank this great panel for enlightening us today. And with that, we'll wrap up. Thanks again.
Thanks for having me.